Thank you very much for attending, everybody, today. This is the third in our series of five new business director thought leader interviews. Today, we have Stephen Larkin from RGA joining us. Stephen currently serves as Executive Director of Growth for West Coast Operations for RGA. Prior to RGA, Stephen was the Chief Marketing Officer at 180 LA. During Stephen's tenure at the agency, 180 LA experienced tremendous momentum and growth, including winning roster spots with Pepsi and HP, projects with Mattel, Dollar Shave Club, Pacific Life, and AOR duties for both University of Phoenix and Miller Lite. Quite a great track record there. Stephen also led assignments with the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, the Hollywood Foreign Press, and 180 LA's Unfairy Tales campaign for UNICEF, which won 5 Lions at Cannes, including the Grand Prix for Good, which is great. Prior to 180 LA, Stephen spent a decade at Mullen, leading new business and running their Pittsburgh office as managing director. Stephen also spent significant time at Hill Holiday as well. So, Stephen, you've got a great track record. We're privileged to have you with us. I'm sure you're busy. I know you just came off of the A&A conference, so appreciate you spending a little bit of time with us today.
Oh, thank you, Mark, and thank you for the kind words. No, it's great to be here. Appreciate it.
Super. So we'll just go ahead and roll right into it. We asked a number of questions, or you supplied a number of questions around the area of pitching and preparing for pitches and responding to RFPs. And so, interesting sort of subject area, always a challenging one for agencies, certainly. So our first question that we asked that you had submitted, which best describes how often you find yourself in a competitive pitch situation. We had nearly 50% of agencies say they pitch or find themselves in a pitch situation about one time a quarter. Another 25-30% of them said more than that, about once a month or more than once a month. Just curious, is this consistent with what you've seen in your business development jobs at various agencies, where the agency is in a pitch situation, roughly once a quarter, or is it typically more often than that?
Yeah, no, great question, Mark. Just because of the size and structure of a lot of the agencies that I've been a part of, what we try to do is try to make sure we always have something. We always try to keep the pipeline full, but we're always in pitch mode. But again, whether you're at an agency that's kind of 100 plus or 500 plus, we're always in a pitch situation. But depending on the size of the office, we also try to make sure there's this focus too. So it's hard to kind of pitch multiple things at any given moment. So kind of my rule of thumb is when you're an office of say less than 100 people, you never want to be more than in a pitch situation like 3 pitches at any given time. But we're always pitching, trying to kind of grow and grow the business and agency.
Got it. What advice would you give any agency, small or large, to help them determine whether or not they should participate in a pitch? Are there certain sets of criteria that you lay out as an agency, or maybe you can speak to that, and then maybe thinking about, smaller mid-size agencies that may not have the resources that a bigger agency has, what sort of considerations should they, look at as they're reviewing possible pitches?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very important question. I think having a criteria is, and we, every agency I've been a part of, we have a criteria. So it can be anything from, do we have are we excited about the brand? Are we excited about the people behind the brand? Are we excited about the opportunity? Is there revenue growth, revenue potential there with the opportunity? Because at the end of the day, right, you got to drive kind of great work and then also kind of drive kind of incremental revenue for the agency. So, but there's a lot of things we look at, right? I mentioned, depending on kind of the office of the agency, you want to make sure you're in a situation where you're basically positioned to win. What I would say, what agencies should never do is just kind of chase random opportunities or just chase money, right? And I think if it checks the boxes, and again, every agency is different. I think if it checks off on your criteria, right? then you should move forward. If it doesn't, then I think you need to kind of really assess with your management team, is this thing right for the agency?
Okay. When you talk about being in a position to win, what, again, if I'm a mid-size agency, what sorts of things would you suggest an agency use to determine that?
Yeah, I mean, one is we will not participate in a pitch unless we have a conversation with either the clients or the people behind the pitch. So it could be a search consultant, it could be even like procurement, sourcing, or the clients. And the first question we like to ask is why RGA, or why our agency, right?
Okay.
Because I think it's really important. And if they say, if they are familiar with the agency, we like to ask them, is there a piece of work, a campaign that you can reference?
Okay.
And there have been situations where someone knew very little about our organization, our agency, and then that kind of brings some red flags, right? There are certain things that raise red flags for us.
Yep.
But if someone don't really understand us or why they're reaching out to us, that's a red flag for us.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Just curious, are you seeing the number of pitches going up or down? I know, we're seeing a lot of project work being used as sort of a sampling mechanism by marketers. Are you seeing the numbers increase over the years that you've been in business, or have they remained relatively steady?
I think the number of opportunities I think have remained the same, but I think in terms of kind of the composition of opportunities has definitely changed, right? And you talk about project-based opportunities, and that's absolutely. But we saw that coming 4 years ago, so that's no surprise, honestly, to the agencies I've been working with. And I think I know this is not the question, but I think even structural wise, right? As you kind of get into more project-based engagements, and you need to kind of think about how to service that, because some of the bigger agencies, right, where they're used to more of a agency of record model, you got to kind of adapt and change with a project-based model because they are a little bit different. But with that said, and I know this group, we're talking to a lot of the smaller agencies, I really think that this presents an amazing opportunity for a smaller agency. Because we're seeing clients, we're seeing brands that really starting to kind of broaden out the scope and the opportunities. They're trying to bring other experts on board. And I think, you as these smaller agencies can really start project engagements with really great brands. I think it's a great opportunity for these types of agencies.
Yeah. Yep. That's cool. And just curious, are seeing more or less search consultant-led searches, or are more being directed directly from the marketing organization?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I've actually run the data. So a lot of this data is available. So we're part of the 4As, and every year they'll publish a report of all the searches that happen in a given year, and they'll talk about the opportunity, the search consultants kind of leading that engagement, whether it was by a search consultant or by client-led. So I looked at kind of 2016 and 2017 search data.
Mm-hmm.
And so roughly about 40% of all reviews are being led by search consultants. And then the balance, 60% is through client-led. So it could be procurement, sourcing. But that certainly is much different. So 10, 15 years ago, the numbers were about 75%, 80% search consultants, 20%. So there's definitely been a shift. And I think as agency folks, using that data point, that really should start to shape how you really go to market and reach out to prospects.
Okay. Why do you think it is that there are fewer agency search consultant-led searches today than there were 10 years ago?
Well, I mean, this is just an assumption, right? So I think there's a lot of pressure on clients, right, to reduce costs, right?
Sure.
And I think when you kind of bring in sourcing and kind of procurement, that's what they do, right? So, not only do they try to find certain kind of partners, it could be agency services, it could be anything, right?
Right.
And so their sole purpose is really to find the right organization to kind of help with a need, but also they have a lens of like how to reduce costs. So, yeah.
Okay, cool. That's great. Great perspective. So our next question was, do you have a pitch team that attends all pitches, or do employees alternate between pitches? And we had 62% of agencies tell us that we alternate employees for different pitches. 30% said use the same, and then the rest were just completely random and had no organized structure or plan. So surprised at all by the fact that most agencies, 62% of them said they alternate employees for different pitches, or is that pretty typical of what you've seen?
Yeah, I think that's typical. I mean, I think you always want to kind of a core team, right? So it could be your leadership team or some of your best people who really can start to evangelize and really be ambassadors for the agency, tell that agency
Right.
story. But then you kind of really kind of fill in some of, some of these experts, right? Depending on, so if you're pitching I'm making this up, a branding campaign or CRM effort, right? You want to make sure you're bringing the right people in the room. But also I think what's really important where you want to find people who are very passionate about something. So we're actually involved with a pitch right now with a great company. They play in the kind of toy in the gaming. And then there were some individuals within our agency that really kind of raised their hands and said, you know what, I really want to work on that thing. I'm very passionate about that.
That's great.
And I think that's when you start to kind of bring in those people. And I think also, depending on, it doesn't matter whether you're a big agency, a small agency. I think when you think about kind of new business, it's a great way to kind of, broaden kind of people's kind of abilities, kind of work on different things.
Sure.
It's a great training ground, right? Never you want to put them in a final new business pitch to be the training ground, but get them involved, let
Right.
them grow. So I
Yeah.
think it's really important to
Yeah. I
never
mean,
just have, yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say at the end of the day, a big part of the decision is based on how much that marketer feels like the agency's really engaged and passionate and motivated to drive their business. So makes sense to bring, folks in, that have that passion. And I was gonna ask you just, if you found that one way or another was most effective, but it sounds like your typical structure is sort of a core team and then bring folks in that have experience or passion or whatever the situation might be. I'm curious, how important do you think it is that members of the ultimate day-to-day team be part of that pitch presentation? I know, you always hear about the bait and switch. You bring in the high-powered folks, and then you never see them after that pitch is over if you end up, winning the business. How important, in your experience, you find it is to bring the one or two individuals in that ultimately will be working on that business and give them sort of a face in front of that potential client.
Yeah, it's really interesting. We're starting to see that more and more from clients, right? Even from even consultant-led pitches, we're seeing actually written in the RFP, the clients are requesting is, hey, we want people in the room who ultimately be servicing our business.
Sure.
And we're seeing more of that over the last couple of years than say from the previous years. And it's based on kind of what you alluded to, Mark, is where agencies tend to kind of put their best people and like the best presenters. And I think clients are savvy about that, right? So they're like, hey, you know what? We want people. We want to hear and kind of meet the management team, but who's going to be our day-to-day people?
Yeah.
So we're
Right.
seeing more of that request.
Okay. Makes sense. All right. Our next question was approximately how often do you respond to RFPs when you're presented with one? And about 60% of respondents said they respond to them 50% of the time or less. Uh, and so, it seems like a lot of agencies are being a little bit more selective, not, participating all the time. For those agencies that are smaller and maybe don't get maybe a seat at the pitch table that often, any advice on maybe for them how to get a little bit more visible? Are most of these big search consultants really just focused on the big agencies and their time is maybe better spent in some other, direction, or what would you give them? And then also, are you surprised by those results that, most of the agencies are only responding, half the time or less to things that are being presented to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think with regarding this, I think those are two questions. I'm going to start with the search consultants
Yep.
first. I think it's really important for agencies to kind of be on their radar. I mean, I personally love working with a search consultant more than procurement led, and I'll tell you why. Because there's always an outcome. There's
Yep.
always kind of a structured process, and we've been in situations where it's a client's been leading a pitch where things have paused, or there's really been no kind of guardrails. Things have been, so I really like search consultant led reviews. There's always an outcome. It's very well organized. So the next question is, should kind of smaller agencies kind of get on the radar? I would say absolutely yes. They are very important. They also kind of, but before you do that, make sure that you have your story and your narrative, right?
Right.
And because you don't want to, I mean, because that's one of the first questions. And again, this world, Mark, very well. What is your narrative? What is your story? What makes you different? And and all the great search consultants, they're going to want to know other, as our business is changing, we're seeing a lot, newer agencies pop up. It's their obligation, it's their job to kind of know what's out there. And I think the really good search and consultants, we really want to understand what is out there. But before you start to engage them, just make sure you're prepared. What's my narrative? What makes us different? And kind of here's our story.
Right.
And what was the second? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just the second part of it was just the results themselves. The fact that 60% of agencies say they only respond to RFPs when presented to them 50% of the time or less. So there seems like a lot of them are being fairly selective in terms of whether or not they respond to an RFP. Surprised by that number, or do you find?
I think the really good agencies who know who they are and what they're good at, you know what I mean? They're not going to chase everything. Again, never kind of
Right.
chase everything. You got to know really what you're good at. And then, again, you go through that kind of that filtering process. So one thing that I kind of alluded to this earlier is like, before we start to engage in any pitch, we have a series of questions that we ask just to get a better sense of like, is this right for us? Are they looking for the type of thinking that we're going to bring to the table, right? And so if you're doing that right, you are going to get a process where some clients and opportunities do drop off, not because they're not a good opportunity, but maybe it's not the right opportunity for your agency.
Right.
I
Right.
think it's really important. So you shouldn't say yes to everything. You should,
Yeah.
because as we know, when you kind of embark on an agency pitch, it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of resources, right? And as we know, kind of pitch teams, they also have kind of their daily business where they're working on brands that they're currently service. So you got to be mindful that when you do embark on a pitch, that's going to take away time maybe for an existing relationship. So
Right.
just being smart, that's all.
Yep, makes good sense. So our next question was, we asked agencies to select all those things that they felt are most important to do prior to pitching or presenting for a client's business, regardless of whether your agency pitches or presents to prospective clients or not. So just going to kind of read through the results here. The top thing that agencies said that is important is making sure that the pitch team is fully prepared and there are no surprises. The second most responded to response was making sure strategy connects to creative execution. The third it was being ruthless about making sure the agency recommendation and pitch answers everything in the client brief. And then we had three other responses: making sure the team rehearses, rereading the original brief prior to every client encounter, and then others. So I'm curious as to, just based on your experience and seeing other agencies, or maybe in, situations that you've been in, where do you see agencies falling down most often when they're in a pitch or presentation situation? Is it missing on the preparation and missing on sort of tying strategy to the insights and ideas that you're presenting, or what has your experience been, and where would you recommend agencies sort of really zero in on as they're preparing for the next upcoming pitch?
Yeah, I think, I think it's making sure you answer the brief. I think sometimes agencies will kind of go off the guardrails and a lot of times we're seeing pitch processes kind of take longer, right? And so things start to evolve. And to this day, what we do is we make sure that the team always, like literally, it could be the night before the actual final presentation, read the brief, reread the brief, because this is why we're embarking on this in the first place. You mentioned kind of making sure kind of strategy and creative kind of connected. That's so important. And so as we see, a lot of times these pitch processes, there's a process, right? There might be a chemistry meeting, there might be like a strategic check-in, then the creative, and then just making sure everything connects. The other thing is rehearse. Again, I don't care what agency you are. There's always pitch situations can be kind of chaos. the best agencies in the world, it can be this chaos, leading up to the pitch. That's just kind of function of the pitch process.
Right.
You're always going to make time to kind of rehearse. Make sure that, the team, because I think clients can kind of smell that, right?
Definitely.
Don't put people in a room together where they haven't been in a room together. They can, make sure it's a team. Little things. It's important that the teams, they like each other, right? That there's no like tension.
Yeah.
I've seen situations where the actual agency team didn't get along, but they're put in a room, and again, clients, they know that, they sense that, they feel that. Not only are they trying to find a breakthrough kind of strategic and creative idea that's going to move their business, but can I work with this team? Chemistry is so important.
Right.
And in the early stage of the process, if something's not feeling right, it's okay to pivot and recognize that.
Right.
But I would say three things: read the brief, make sure strategy and creative are connected, and rehearse.
Right. How do
Very
you,
simple.
yep. How do you, not every agency has everything a client needs. And I know just from our research that marketers are willing to let agencies bring sort of third-party strategic relationships in to a conversation if that agency doesn't necessarily have, maybe it's digital media buying expertise or whatever the situation might be. Um, any advice for agencies that, don't necessarily have all of that expertise, need to align with a strategic partner as they plan to present and pitch to a prospective client? You're shaking your head.
No, no, I know. I think it's okay. I think what agency, just be transparent about it, right? So I think it's okay. If you're kind of a small and mid-level agency to bring in it's okay. I mean,
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with that. Just be
right,
transparent, right? And then the other thing is before you do that, let them know, but also, hey, we've had great success working with this partner. For
right,
example, this is what we did for client A. Here's what we
right,
did for client B. And that's okay. I mean, I think it's absolutely okay. But again, I think, sometimes agencies try to hide it, try to white label it. I believe always lead with the truth.
right.
I think it's always important, but just be transparent.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think your practice piece is particularly important there. I know I've sat in final pitch presentations before where an agency had brought in a strategic partner and it was clear, not only were personalities different, but the approach and the way they presented and how everything connected up just didn't connect up. It didn't make good sense, and that it was extremely transparent that there were, that these guys maybe either hadn't worked well together or much together, and it just left a bad taste in the client's mouth.
Yeah.
So practicing is definitely key, especially when you're bringing a third party in. Again, appreciate the time. Maybe any last words of advice you can leave for any of the agencies watching today? Again, many of them are sort of in that mid-size space as they think about, responding to RFPs, sort of, shaping their agency so that they can go forward, not just have to, proactively, reach out to prospects, but be able to put themselves in a position where they have, multiple avenues to win new business. Any words of wisdom or advice for those agencies looking to sort of step it up a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. Thank you so much for allowing me to even kind of speak to this group. While certainly our business is kind of going through some interesting times, I still think it's the greatest business in the world. I really do, and I feel privileged to kind of be in this business. As I tell people, I love Mondays, and I really do. And I would just say, just before I think there's never been a better time for smaller agencies, and I really believe that because we've got a lot of clients, they're going outside of their core kind of AOR relationships, right? They're starting to kind of bring in agencies for projects. And my advice to smaller agencies is think about the longer term of the project, right? It's a great opportunity. Jack Connors once said when I worked at Hill Holiday years ago, he was like, just get me in the hen house. Just get me in the hen house.
Right.
And his strategy is like, I will take on a project, get me in the hen house, and I'm going to do an amazing job. And then I'm going to grow that project to the next project, to the next project. So,
Right.
um, look at those as opportunities, and but also understand as an agency kind of who you are, what you do well, kind of stick to that. Don't go outside. Clients are not upset if you say no, as long as you kind of give them a very rational discussion as to why.
Yes.
People respect that, right? They don't want to waste your time, and you don't want to waste their time, and it's okay. And but yeah, it's I think it's a great time to be a smaller to mid-sized agency.
That's great. All right. Well, Stephen, really appreciate your time today. So Stephen Larkin from RGA has been our guest today. He currently serves as the Executive Director of Growth for West Coast Operations for RGA. Prior to RGA, Stephen was Chief Marketing Officer for 180 LA. He has also, prior to 180 LA, he spent a decade at Mullen, leading new business and running their Pittsburgh office as managing director. Stephen also spent a significant period of time working at Hill Holliday as well. So, Stephen, I really appreciate the time. I know your schedule is a busy one, always being in that pitch mode. And I too love Mondays. Monday is a good day, despite what everybody else says. So,
Best business in the world.
Yep. I do appreciate all the perspective. I'm sure everybody will benefit from it. And so, thanks so much for making the time today.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark.
All right.